The old watering can tips forward over the first pot. A thin stream taps the dry soil, and you stop a second longer at the plant with the curled edge. To someone else, it can look a little excessive, maybe even lonely, like one more small routine for a person who does not know how to leave things alone. But that reading misses the harder part. When fewer people need you in ways you can clearly see, a task like this can start to matter more than it should. So this is not only about the plants. It is about waking up to something that still responds to your care. A little water, a lifted stem, darker soil by the roots. In a quieter stage of life, that kind of visible result can feel bigger than it looks. Which means that if this morning habit feels unusually important, the watering can may be holding together more than the yard. And then something quieter starts to show up. Along the fence line, you move from pot to pot, the watering can tilting just enough to keep the stream steady. Each plant asks for a slightly different pause. One gets a quick pass, another gets a longer moment. There is no rush, but there is a rhythm, start, tend, finish, that the body recognizes without effort. From the outside, that rhythm can look small, but inside it, something important is happening. Each pot becomes a task you can see, complete, and trust. In a day that no longer comes with a built-in schedule, this gives the morning a shape. You begin something, you follow through, and you leave behind a visible result. That sequence, simple as it is, can steady more than the plants. It is a kind of self-made structure. No one assigned it, no one is waiting on it, but it still works. And that is part of the strength here. You are not drifting. You are building a day out of pieces that make sense. At the same time, something else begins to form under it. When this becomes the clearest place where usefulness shows up, the rest of the day can start to feel less defined by comparison. And that is where the habit stops looking simple. Because the watering is not just filling pots anymore. It is quietly filling a gap the day does not explain out loud. And this is where the pattern starts to make more sense. You sit for a moment on the porch chair, the watering can resting near your foot, looking out before deciding where to begin. There was a time when the day arrived already divided. People needed things, decisions had weight, effort moved something forward that others depended on. You did not have to ask what mattered. It showed up. Then, slowly or all at once, that structure thinned out. The calls came less often. The responsibilities changed shape. Whole parts of the day stopped asking for you in the same clear way. Nothing dramatic had to happen for this shift to take hold. It is just how a life can quietly rearrange itself. So something else steps in. Not loudly, not officially. A row of plants. A routine that does not argue back. A place where effort still leads to a visible change. You water and something responds. You return the next day and it holds. It is not the same as what was there before, but it carries a similar feeling underneath, being able to act and see that the action mattered. And that is why the yard begins to take on more weight than it should, because it is not only filling time, it is replacing a kind of clarity that used to come from the rest of life. What makes this harder to explain is what it gives back. At the small potting bench, you press the soil flat with 2 fingers, brushing away a bit that spills over the edge. You notice the leaf that is starting to fade before it fully gives out. You adjust without thinking. There is a quiet accuracy in the way you do it. From the outside, that might look like simple repetition, but it is not mindless. It is attention that has been trained over years, knowing when something is slightly off before it becomes a problem. That kind of awareness does not disappear just because the setting changes. It looks for somewhere to go. There is strength in that. You are still capable of noticing, adjusting, keeping things from slipping too far. You are still working with your hands in a way that produces a result you can trust. And there is a certain dignity in that kind of steady care. Nothing flashy, nothing announced, but reliable. At the same time, that same strength has a quiet edge to it. When you are used to being this attentive, this responsive, it becomes harder to sit with spaces where nothing is asking for you at all. The skill does not turn off. It waits. And if it cannot find somewhere to land, it starts to feel like something in you is being underused. That is where the object starts doing emotional work. because the plants are not the only thing being maintained here. And this is where the habit begins to carry a quieter strain. Late in the afternoon, you step back outside and press your fingers into the soil of a pot you already watered. It does not need much, you know that, but you check anyway. The motion is small, almost automatic, but it lingers longer than it has to. From the outside, it can look like overdoing it, like not knowing when something is finished, but the feeling underneath is harder to name. When there is no small task waiting, the space it leaves behind can feel wider than expected. Not empty in a dramatic way, just open in a way that does not tell you what to do with yourself. So you return to something that answers. You touch the soil, you adjust the angle of the can, you make one more pass. It gives the moment a boundary again. It says, this part is handled. And that matters more than it should. The strength in this is obvious. You are still engaged, still responsive, still able to create a result with your hands. But the cost is quieter. When your sense of being okay begins to lean on these small proofs, the absence of them can feel heavier than anyone around you realizes. And that is when the routine is no longer just supporting the day. It is protecting you from a kind of stillness that feels harder to sit inside. And this is where people around you often read it wrong. At the patio table, you sort through a small stack of plant tags, turning them so the names face the same way. From inside the house, someone says, "You're out here again? You should take it easy." It sounds casual, even caring, but it lands on something they are not quite seeing. To them, it looks like repetition, like you are filling time with something small, maybe even being a little too particular about things that do not matter much. But what is actually happening does not feel small from the inside. Each pass through the yard, each adjustment, each moment of attention is a way of confirming that you still notice what needs care, and that you can respond. Both things can be true at once. Yes, it is a simple routine. And yes, it is carrying more than a simple routine should. The strength is that you are still holding on to a kind of self-trust, seeing, deciding, acting. The cost is that when this is misunderstood, you are less likely to explain it. You just keep doing it quietly. And when a need as basic as feeling useful goes unspoken, it does not disappear. It settles into the habit, and the habit becomes harder to let go of. The more private layer usually shows up later. One of the plants that had been struggling a few days ago is standing a little taller now. The leaves have opened back up. You set the watering can down on the concrete and watch it for a moment longer than necessary. From the outside, that might just look satisfying, a small success. But the feeling underneath runs deeper than that. It is not only that the plant recovered, it is that something you did helped it recover. Your attention, your timing, your care, those still have an effect. And that matters more than most people would guess. Because when other parts of life stop giving clear feedback, this becomes one of the few places where cause and result still line up in a way you can trust. You do something, and it changes something. It is a quiet kind of proof. Not dramatic, not shared, but real. And once a person begins to rely on that kind of proof, the habit is no longer just about tending plants. It becomes a way of holding on to the feeling that you can still keep something going. If losing this routine would unsettle you more than you expected, that matters. It does not mean you are weak or overly attached. Sometimes, a small act of care becomes the structure that keeps self-respect visible. And when that happens, the watering can is no longer just for the plants. It is helping hold continuity with the self. You set the watering can down beside the row, the soil in each pot darker now, quietly holding what you just gave it. From the outside, it can look like a small habit. Another pass through the yard, another morning spent the same way. People see repetition, they see preference, they see someone who just likes being out here. What is actually happening is harder to see. You are making usefulness visible again. You are giving your attention somewhere it still changes the outcome. You are keeping a part of yourself active that does not want to fade quietly into the background. It's not about the plants, it's about still being needed. And there is a quiet thought that rarely gets said out loud. I wish someone understood that this is not about filling time. It is about keeping a sense of purpose from slipping out of reach. The next morning, the watering can is already where you left it. You pick it up the same way, feel the weight shift, and step back toward the first pot. Nothing about the motion has changed. The angle of the pour, the pause at the weaker leaf, the quiet scan across the row. It all looks the same as before, but it does not mean the same thing anymore. This is not just maintenance. It is a way of keeping a certain version of yourself in motion. The part that notices, the part that responds, the part that still knows how to make something better than it was a few minutes ago. From the outside, it can still be mistaken for a small routine, something optional, something you could skip. But from the inside, it is holding something steady that does not have many other places to land. And sometimes, the most ordinary object in a yard is doing the work of keeping a person connected to who they still are. There is a quiet fear that can settle in without much warning, the feeling that your usefulness has become less visible than it once was. Not gone, just harder to point to. But that feeling is not a flaw. It is a signal that something in you still expects to matter, still expects to have an effect on the world around you. And when a simple act like watering plants begins to carry that weight, it is not because the task is small. It is because the part of you that wants to remain steady, capable, and needed has found a place to keep going.